Good evening, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Eleanor Alcorn, Chair and Eloise W. Martin of Applied Arts of Europe, and I am delighted to welcome you to this evening's program. As we begin, a reminder to please silence your mobile devices. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Jonathan Tavares. Jonathan Tavares is the Amy and Paul Carbone Curator of Applied Art at the Art Institute of Chicago. He is an early modern decorative arts, arms, and armor scholar with a PhD from the Bard Graduate Center. Dr. Tavares was responsible for the very engaging galleries of Arms and Armor, part of the Deering Family Galleries of Medieval and Renaissance art that opened in 2017. His purview here includes medieval to Baroque applied arts, and he has published numerous articles on 16th century arms and armor, as well as their manufacture and connection to print culture. He is an excellent colleague and a wonderful storyteller, so we are in for a treat. And without further delay, please join me in welcoming Jonathan to the stage.
Thank you, Eleanor. I'm excited to present this topic to you this evening, a chance to focus on some of the hidden stories of our armors on view, and an excuse to share thoughts I've been playing around with for some time. There we go. I have always been fascinated by the lives of these objects inside and out. To analyze each part spread over an examination table in storage is one of my great joys as a curator. And in that moment, asking what can they reveal to us about who wore or commissioned them, why, and for what purpose or event? What can their material anatomy tell us about the bodies they protected or the craftsmen who made and decorated them? In this presentation, I will share 3 case studies of the 16th century armor on view in the galleries. Examination of these armors has answered some of these questions, or at least given some hints. Unfortunately, and perhaps surprisingly, most armors are shrouded in mystery with their original owners lost to time. Often the greatest primary document is the armor itself. Within them, every rivet in every hole has or had a purpose. In studying their material remains inside and out can be a challenge to the eyes and imagination. In these examples, I will not be able to give a full account of their development or design, but I will jump right in and focus on some particular aspects. These are chosen to complement each other and set a broader picture of Renaissance armor, its form and its function. First, chronologically, is this fragmented armor that has been on loan to the Art Institute from the collection of Daniel Manoogian since 2021. It is among the finest of its period in America, and represents a highly tailored or bespoke armor made for a specific client. It no longer retains its original gauntlets, those are the defenses for the hands, or leg harness, for which surely it had. But remarkably, it has survived with its matching chevron, that's the defense for the horse's head, which suggests it once also had a steel-plated saddle. There's a lot we do not know about this armor, but before analyzing the pieces, it is worth reflecting on what we do know. Though it is undated, the design or style of the plates make it clear that it was made in Augsburg, southern Germany, about 1520 to 25. As a part of fashion or clothing, armor can be dated to the decade by its shape or silhouette. Compare the bold, bulbous, and billowing shape of pleated and gathered textile on these 2 garments recorded by the Augsburg wealthy accountant Matthias Schwarz from 1530. And so this is an interesting manuscript where Schwarz actually, decade by decade, would record clothes that he was proud of owning in a book. So in the bold, bulbous shape you're seeing here is very much referenced in the armor. You have this square sort of neck opening that's also in the armor, and these billowing sleeves, this massive cowder that covers or protects the elbow is also sort of mimicking that. And then all these radiating flutes, that's very much mimicking the pleats of the clothing. The armor is also unmarked by its maker, but its similarity to this documented example in Vienna that belonged to a noble of Augsburg, particularly the snub-nosed visor you see here, very similar to the helmet. In the quality of the plates, both of these attributes make it possible to attribute them to the greatest armorer of his generation, this man, Coleman Helmschmied, seen here in his betrothal portrait about 10 years prior to the making of this armor. His family name literally means helmsmith. He was the preferred armorer of the imperial court of Emperor Charles V and his grandfather Maximilian I before him. The decoration of the armor is also attributed to the Augsburg artist, printmaker, and armor etcher Daniel Hopfer. His hand is seen here in detail on the armor in Vienna at the bottom, and above with the detail taken of the back plate of the same armor on view. And most characteristic of Hopfer are these maiden-headed creatures in the band. So you see that here on the Vienna armor, and then on the armor on view, a smaller version right there. And then there is also this fine scrolling foliage you see running up and down here and there. It's a mixture of Italian-influenced Renaissance motifs with Gothic holdovers, reminiscent of manuscript marginalia. Relative to Hopfer's great claim to fame as the likely inventor of the etching process used to produce printing plates, he represents the link from armor decorator to printmaker, as on this print that records the signature DH, you see it right about there, DH, for Daniel Hopfer, with designs for bands very similar to those he used on armor. And the process for etching is basically you paint a resist over the finished steel plates, then you apply an acid paste, which is copper sulfate in vinegar and salt, and you mix it all up, let it sit for an hour, remove it, and it has eaten away anywhere that wasn't painted. So very much a activity done by painters like Hopfer, but Hopfer is the one who took it from just decorating armor and swords and then made it into a medium for making intaglio prints. These attributions are rather firm, but it remains a mystery as to who commissioned or wore this armor. Clearly, it was some noble with significant means. An armor like this worth many times the yearly income of a skilled craftsman, likely a member of the imperial Habsburg court. We may never know who for certain owned it, though it may connect to where it was recently, and that is this fairy tale Tyrolean castle high up in the mountains, Trotzberg, where it may have stood for several hundred years. Unfortunately, the surviving inventories of the armory at Trotzberg do not provide enough detail for its identification. On the right is the castle armory as it is now, and on the left is how the armor looked, sort of complete with restored legs and gauntlets at the turn of the century. The contents of the armory suggest a mixture of some hereditary material associated with the current owner, Count Goes Enzenberg. However, more likely, The armory is mostly derived from the antiquities market of the 19th century, as many pieces or objects have clear other origins. The castle changed hands many times in the period. It was first a hunting lodge of the Emperor Maximilian in the 1490s, who exchanged it to a prosperous mining family, who then sold it in the 1550s to an Augsburg patrician, eventually by marriage becoming the property of the Augsburg Fugger banking family. It is conceivable with the Augsburg connection that the armor, like much of the household furniture, came from that origin, but no proof. Apparently, the armory was even looted in 1809 during the Napoleonic Wars. In 2017, the armor was sent to Switzerland to be cleaned and restored, where you see me with the restorer Ian Ashdown, taking it to pieces and removing many of the modern 19th century replaced rivets, which occasioned an opportunity seldom experienced, to see the armor completely broken down into parts. This allowed hidden details, alterations, and repairs to be much more visible, aspects usually obscured by internal leathers and overlapping plates fixed together. One thing was evident from the beginning. There was clear sign of use in what I believe was the context of a tournament or mock battle known as the tourney, as seen depicted in this detail of a woodcut by Lucas Cranach. So here's the detail of the tourney here. But I want to point out here on the helmet, too, we see these rather crude square perforations and some holes. Those most certainly were for affixing these massive crests of ostrich feathers that you see on the combatants. Second, there are numerous areas of cracking over the hardened steel plates, like this elbow counter or defense, and you see a lot of cracks here and there. Indicative, perhaps, of the sort of bashing like that seen in the vignette on the left. That's here. Participants in these tourneys used blunted swords and scored by the number of their hits. Here you see referees or heralds using their staffs to block cuts from a contestant who has exceeded their number of strikes and getting carried away. In looking at the armor in pieces, you also notice other high-quality details. Deceptively, the armor looks symmetrical. But on closer inspection of the arm openings of the breast and back plate, by design, they're not. So you see it's much more open here than it is there. That is to say it's made for a right-handed user. Which is universal in this period, as most nobles would have been trained to be right-handed. It means the armorer considered more lateral movement from the right, with more protection to the armpit on the left. This is more evident when the breastplate is removed altogether, as seen here. And here you can also get a chance to see the inside with the replaced modern leather and all the rivets that hold it together. And also I want to point out this rather hook-looking device called the lance rest. More on that later with my next case study. In examination, the breast and back plate went in pieces, that is unriveted. Alterations became apparent, one of which involves this broken out hole the restorer is pointing at, and here in detail, right there. You see the rivet hole that attached this back plate to the central waist plate, that's this here, and just below it, the broken out hole where the back plate used to be attached. So here's the hole where it was just recently attached and where it used to be attached to the central waist plate. In essence, the back plate was trimmed shorter along the old rivet hole and a new hole added. Perhaps as much as an inch or more was trimmed back. The more we looked at the armor, the more evidence was found that this was a rare example of an armor taken in rather than let out for its client. And here it is a detail of the breastplate attached to the waist plate where there was a parallel reduction. So whatever happens to the back plate also happened to the front. And it's a very slim waist that you're seeing here. The external measurement is 30 inches, suggesting the possible internal actual waist of the wearer with padded undergarment might have been something more like 25 inches. And even if under the rib cage, it's still rather slim. And I also want to point out, while we're at this detail, there are some cuts across the flutes. So again, more evidence of having been used, perhaps in a tournament. Similarly, when taking the helmet apart, unscrewing the two pivots at the temples, that's these bolts on the side there, there is further evidence of reduction to fit a smaller than designed head. So there is cutting back the finished side along the face opening, as seen on the left, including cutting the edge that is etched, so post-finish. So this little edge that is etched here has been cut back, and so also around the ear. Then there's an elongation of the pivot holes to accommodate the reduction and allow the parts to still pivot together. And this is that pivot hole that used to be just one round hole, but then it's been elongated. And then the front chin, or the bever, that's this portion here, the sides have been cut back so that it comes in closer to the bowl. And the visor, too, was slightly trimmed at the chin. So this area here, and that's why it probably doesn't fit absolutely perfect on the bever. Just about here, it's been trimmed back. And lastly, there is a brazed repair just along here. That is a period repair, probably perhaps a crack from that tournament damage I speak of. Even the back of the helmet, the nape plate that's here, was moved up deeper into the bowl by as much as a ½ inch with new rivet holes made, just as was done at the waist of the breast and back plate. So here are two holes that have been cut across here and here. That used to be down here, and that's where these holes are, empty, unused. And then this rivet was taking its place, so it's moved in as much as maybe a ½ inch or so. We may never know who originally owned this armor or why exactly it was modified, but I can imagine a scenario where it was ordered at a distance for a teenage patron, like this 16-year-old Duke Johann IV of Anhalt in a similar armor. Clothing or measurements would have been sent, and knowing that it would take some months to produce, etch, polish, and put together, the armor was intentionally made slightly bigger in anticipation of growth. But on delivery, it was found to be too bulky for the boy, and so the armor was slightly and methodically reduced all over its core on the spot, specifically around the chest, height, and head size, whereas the arms are easily adaptable by tightening straps. This appears to have been done rather quickly, perhaps in time for a specific event. It may have been easier to make it slightly larger and take it in than to find it too small and have the plates laboriously reforged, repolished, and redecorated. The size or proportions does suggest a teenager who actually used this armor, perhaps in a tournament, and likely trained in it as well. What a statement for the family to clad their teenager in the very best armor available. Now, as an aside, but relative to this interpretation, it is important to address the prevalent myth that people were smaller in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Anthropologist studies show that on average, the height of 16th century European males was about 5'8" to 5'9", my height, just a few inches below the current European average of 5'11". In the same 5'9" as the current American average. So yes, this could have been for a smaller adult man, but I do believe proportionately it could just as likely have been a teenager. The next case study is another armor from the context of tournament, but in this case, not a finely bespoke armor, rather an example of period recycled armor. Gracing the center stage of the gallery is this Italian jousting armor from about 1560. The date, though, is misleading for reasons that bring this armor to the discussion. For if the last example seems to have been made and altered for a moment, this one has evidence of a very long working life, possibly for well over 100 years, from the mid-16th century well into the 18th century. Its early history or provenance before 1930, when it was bought at auction by Chicago and George F. Harding, remains a mystery. Its origins, nevertheless, would have been for use in this event, a jousting tournament in a grand Italian piazza, as in this case, held for a royal wedding in Turin in 1620. And so here, right there, are the jousters with lances lowered in the campo aperto, or the open field, without any barrier, which is, to my eyes, almost a sideshow to the other festivities rather than the main event. And contestants scored by breaking the lances in a set number of passes, either 3 or 4. And then there's this massive papier-mâché or plaster colossus in floats or carts, and they're over here in this faux mountain with mythological themes likely to do with marriage or love. And then there are the aristocratic viewers in the grandstand you see here and along the sides, whereas the rest of the common folk are perilously watching from the top of the roof. And in the foreground are the noble participants waiting for their turn at the joust, and they're all over here. And then there's the gathering of lances resting on the side of the building. And I want to draw attention, too, to the feathers and the horse caparisons and the textiles and the plumes. When you strip away all that fanfare, costume, and feathers on the armor, this is what is left. A very plain piece of sports equipment. And like, say, today's hockey pads covered by a jersey, so too was the armor. And here on the right is a page from a mid-16th century tailor's manual depicting a design for a client clad in such a plain armor, embellished with matching skirt or bases, as they're known, and horse caparison or trappings, likely in embroidered silk or velvet. So the textiles were commissioned for the event, used once, and then recycled for its materials. The armor would live on to see other events. Vast expenses would have been paid to embellish the contestants in this way, paid for either by the host or the participating nobles. In fact, this armor belongs to a large group of similar Italian jousting armors, all dating to the mid to late 16th century, produced in a set formula, for example, this armor in the Philadelphia Museum of Art that you see on the right, or this armor in the Marzoli collection in the Civic Museum of Brescia in Italy, or this fragmented one in London's Wallace collection. And many others can be found in such places as the Vatican Armory, the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, and also Warwick Castle in England, to name just a few. Attesting to the long working lives of these armors is this 1710 manuscript that diagrams the parts of the prescribed jousting armor in a book about the instructions and regulations for jousting in the city of Bologna. The rules and equipment of this joust crystallized around the middle of the 16th century, and our armor may be considered one of the early extant examples that was put together at the beginning of this tradition and used long after. It reflects the many civic games in Italy that still happen today, like the horse race in Siena, or the Gioco del Ponte, or Game of the Bridge in Pisa. In early periods, wealthy landowners or civic nobles or patricians participated in traditional jousts regularly and required these armors as equipment, either renting, buying, or borrowing them, but always updated with the ephemeral textiles and feathers. I'd like to point out, amongst all the parts, there's also the overcoat that you're seeing there, the embroidered overcoat or velvet, and then also the plumes, the panache. On these jousting armors, the safety of the wearer was designed through layers of defense. It is consequently much heavier than the last case study, here weighing nearly 75 pounds altogether, rather than 30 or so pounds of the last armor. And when peeling back the layers, the first is these large reinforcing plates to the face, neck, and left side of the body, the arms and the chest, which are all the main target for the opponent's lance to strike. Also the side that requires much less movement. The breast, backplate, and arm defenses represent the next layer with a series of threaded bolts to secure these reinforcing plates. Looking closely near the bolts, there are more holes on the breastplate than needed. Why? You can see here, so many holes. What happened? These reinforcers have been moved to be fixed in different positions over the breastplate at least 3 times to adjust for people with different neck or body heights to accommodate where the helmet fits. And looking closer at the upper breastplate under the neck opening, we can see here are the bolts, and they are fixed by a bar that is then riveted together. So you can see the movement. It's currently here, it was here, it was also once there. So there was one slight movement and then one very big movement there to make the vision slit slide down. So it must have been a much smaller individual. We also see these 2 posts that hold the plate against where the neck roll is, the neck opening. And those 2 little posts, spacers, if you will, also move. This one moved from here to there. So it is very telling when you get to look at this with the reinforcers off. Looking closer, all these bolts bring to mind this 1946 Disney short with Goofy becoming a knight for a day, as Squire Cedric getting the knight ready for the tournament by bolting him in. Here at the back rather than the front, but the concept, as humorous as it is not entirely inaccurate, as you can see. That this is exactly kind of what happened, in fact. What is true is that it would take a while to don the armor. And once you were in it, you were in it. It was designed for the helmet's upper visor to be raised by pulling the leather on the side to release the latch and take air in better vision while waiting to joust, like the figure on the right from the same Milanese tailor's manual. Coincidentally, there is more than one visual account of jousters using parasols to keep the sun and heat off while they're waiting for their turn to joust. It's rather amusing, isn't it? And when looking at the sides of the breast and back plate on the jousting armor, the hinge and opposite side stud have been altered to increase the girth a few times, possibly to let out at least twice, but still a very slim waist, 26 to 28 inches internally, in fact. So here's the stud. It has 2 holes for it to adjust. And then here is the hinge that multiple holes attest to the hinge being moved to fit different sizes. And this hook, known as the lance rest, has also been moved to suit different users. There you see the bolts that keep it in place, and then there's a vacant hole from where it used to be. So what is the lance rest? Well, it is a very essential component that basically is a shock absorber. So if we look at the lance, there's this roll of leather called a grapper. And what that is designed to do is grapple against the serrated front edge of the lance rest. So upon impact with your opponent, all the force of the impact is distributed not to your shoulder or to your wrist where you could dislocate it or break it, but rather to your entire body, to your core, and to your seat in the horse. So it unifies the horse and rider in the point of the lance with the complete physics towards that impact. It's really essential equipment. Apart from the alterations, there is also evidence that it was put together from old parts found in an armory, perhaps initially in time for a specific event. For example, the left and right arms are not a true pair. The roped edges on the left, you're seeing here, and then compared to the right, are more finely crafted and may even date some 20 years earlier from the rest of the armor. And it could even have been part of a field armor rather than a designated jousting armor. Compared to the right here, seen disassembled into the shoulder defense and the arm defense, the edges are not as finely worked. In such a context, one could easily recycle or reuse plain pieces of armor that would be covered over by tailored textiles anyway. Normally, I would conclude such a composition was pulled together in the antiques market of the 19th century. But with alterations and clear signs of use together as a unit with other reinforcements and repaired parts, it is more likely composed in its working life for the joust. The helmet has been crudely perforated many times over for the attachment of feather panaches, which apparently were requisite in these events, pieces of ephemera that unfortunately do not survive. And you can see all these holes here, some of them rather small, some of them massively big there. And looking back at, again, the manuscript from 1710, we see this interesting object here with screws called the forcella, or the fork. Could it have been for attachment here? Curiously, the back plate also has a mysterious bolt, a threaded bolt, jutting out from the center that seems to serve no purpose. I suspect this was for bolting down the lower end of a form of forcella or fork screwed into the helmet. Again, the lower part of this piece here. Similar to the neck brace found on a group of German jousting armors from the Saxon court, like this one in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But is this brace intended as it is here to protect the wearer from extreme whiplash when struck by a lance, or was it, as the manuscript suggests, for the crest, to affix this massive 5-foot-tall Baroque displays of ostrich and egret feathers, as seen here in this 1608 drawing? And this drawing is not alone. There are many images of this. Perhaps it served both purposes simultaneously. None of the other Italian jousting armors of the group seem to survive with such a fork intact, though. As displayed in the gallery, we produced a rather more tame recreation of feathers, typical of the initial mid-16th century era of use. Without it, it seems the armor would not fully be understood. Some of the perforated holes in plume tube are being used to fix this panache, which, by the way, is a collaboration with the School of Historical Dress in London. But the many holes attest to a variety of feather displays we can only imagine. And so this is a case of a plain recycled armor, which, once decked out with all the ephemera and pageantry relative to its extended time of use, is quite visually stimulating. A great deal has been lost to time, but the evidence is there. This last case study is again from a tournament context, but unlike the last two, I can posit the original owner and even the specific event it was decorated for based on its provenance and the details of its etched and gilded decoration, but more on that soon. These pieces are also a fragment of what is called an armor garniture, parts made and often decorated en suite for interchangeable purposes, to suit either the joust, tourney, or indeed to use in the battlefield. And in this case, it essentially combines the uses of both previous examples of armor for one patron. The Art Institute's collection holds the majority of pieces of this garniture that oddly came in two different groups and also in different states of preservation. some with the gilding left but deeply pitted from centuries of rust and neglect, while others only have slight traces of gold as they have been ground down by 19th century restorers, nearly losing the etched decoration in the process of getting rid of the deep pits. Nevertheless, their distinct decoration, among other evidence, shows they all once belonged together. Like many armors, the other parts of this garniture are dispersed. The jousting helmet here is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The tourney helmet is in some private collection unknown. If you ever see it, tell me. The breast and back plate is in the Palazzo Venezia in Rome. And lastly, the jousting gauntlet, the manifer for the left hand, is in the Musée de l'Armée in Paris. So quite dispersed. There is still a jousting grand guard or shoulder reinforced that is unaccounted for, as well as a pair of gauntlets, if not also a few other possible pieces. For sure, the armor was produced in Augsburg, like the first armor. But 30 years later, in the 1560s and 70s, this is marked on the inside of several plates, like here in the right shoulder and detailed there. So it's just a little divot here that I've blown up for you. With the quality control mark of an A for Augsburg. There is conjecture on what this stamp actually was meant for, but most likely it was stamped by officers of the Guild or Corporation of Armorers who checked exported wares for the quality of the steel, and then stamped the inside of certain pieces to assure that it passed. It implies the armor was exported out of the city, but to where? Polish Lithuania, where it formerly lived in the armory of this castle, Nischwitz, today in modern Belarus. Built up by this Polish-Lithuanian prince, Nicholas Krzysztof Radziwiłł. It's interesting for a moment to think that this fragmented armor represents a shell of this long-gone body at a certain point in his life. It's interesting to just think about that as sort of an exoskeleton. Nicholas Krzysztof came from an illustrious line of Lithuanian magnates with dukedoms spread amongst several branches in vivadships or governorships, of which he was eventually governor of Vilnius, among others. He was deeply Catholic. He converted to Catholicism after spending much time in Rome, and also as a response to his Calvinist father. He would famously be a pilgrim to Jerusalem later in life, founded many convents, and was a patron of the arts and architecture. Nicholas Krzysztof Radziwiłł had a distinguished career as a diplomat. He led forces for Polish-Lithuania against Russia in the Livonian War. He was a close confidant to the Polish King Sigismund August and present at his deathbed in 1572. Indeed, the king's second wife, Barbara, was a Radziwiłł, a cousin to Nicholas. Most significantly, in the context of the armor, he was a major part of the Polish-Lithuanian envoy to France to bring back to Krakow their first elected monarch, Henry III of Valois, the then brother of the King of France. This is, that we know this is his armor is further corroborated by the iconography of the etched decoration throughout the garniture. For example, two of the Radziwiłł crests are the eagle and the lion, and you see the eagle also here, that are found on many of the bands of decoration on the armor. And here you can see over each other the eagles and the lions stacked up. The eagle also represents the family's claim as princes of the Holy Roman Empire, conferred one generation prior. When I first thought about these fragments, one piece of the decoration that most intrigued me was this representation of a chain or collar with a medallion. And And the decoration truly did intrigue me. And this is on the reinforce for the joust. The condition, again, with its deep-set pitting from rust later removed, and the traces of remaining gilding make it highly challenging to discern. What I can make out is a very distinct long nose, short beard, and armor, for which I saw similarities to other actual portrait medals of Henry III Valois. The very same elected monarch, Nicholas Christoph, was part of the diplomatic party to bring back to Poland. It was not uncommon for nobles to wear gold medallions and chains of favor with images of the king or lord they served, or indeed were given such a token of gratitude and to acknowledge their political ties. And again, this is where I see the nose and the face, but again, an interpretation. This makes sense for the context of the year etched here on the shin of the leg, 1573. Precisely when Nicholas Christophe was attending court in Paris to bring the new French-born king to Poland. French-born king to Poland. He also would have attended that year's fetes, tournaments, and other events meant to welcome the Polish-Lithuanian nobles like himself to the French court, as captured in this image from the Valois tapestry series, here recounting the fete at the Tuileries Gardens, honoring the Polish ambassadors. I can almost imagine this figure in the foreground here as Nicholas Christophe, though historians believe it more likely a member of the royal Valois family speaking with an ambassador dressed in more traditional Polish attire. In the center is also the Queen Mother, Catherine de' Medici in black of Serpent Queen fame. And Henry III, the Duke of Anjou, was not expected to become King of France. So politically, being elected as the first foreign king of Poland was thought very good for him. After Henry arrived in Poland in February of 1574, in celebration of his coronation, a tournament was held at Wawel Castle in Krakow. Nicholas Christophe was most likely a participant wearing this armor. There are many bird edges over the reinforcing visor for the tourney from blows or cuts delivered in the tournament, and you can see those bird edges here. Also, cuts carried in alignment across like this and like that, and you can see it here on the shoulder reinforce or guard brace. There's no question the armor was used in the tourney and would have looked much like this contemporary manuscript, including the gilded bands you see in the armor here. So you can very much imagine this as the image of this armor in use. Befitting Nicholas Christophe's piety, the bands are decorated with figures of virtues, both spiritual and temporal, taken directly from print sources such as the Nuremberg artist Virgil Solis, but copied in reverse, as here with the figure of justice. And so there's the sword of justice that's there, and the scales here, the scales there. Also copied in reverse, the virtue of peace, holding a lamb rather than with one on its side, as in the print, a change to fit the figure into the space of the narrow band. Many other parts of the decoration also derive from available print sources. Here on the back of the exchange shoulder defense for the joust is a nude female figure taken from this design print for a dagger sheath by the German artist Heinrich Aldegraver, dating some 40 years prior, depicting the whore of Babylon, adapted here perhaps as a figure of Eve. The design, though, is flipped with the ornament that you see here, and the figure there on the bottom. But the details of this distinct etching, a style I have never seen on any other armor of this period, do not have any coherence as they normally do on Augsburg armors. They seem haphazard and jumbled. Why? Looking at the very fine etching on this piece, the reinforcing shoulder defense for the tourney, it is completely different for a more skilled hand than the other details I just have shown. That multiple hands are involved in the etching of this armor is especially obvious when looking at the backs of these two shoulder defenses together. Both have the Eve figure here and here, but the left is so much looser and sloppier than the right. You begin to get the idea that some of the etching was rushed, looking at the edge treatment of the bands that goes from a considered balls, you see here, to dashes, you're seeing there. When originally gilded and seen from a distance, who would know other than the page who maintained the armor and perhaps the owner when looking at it more closely? But still, why? And I should point out too, there's tiny little specks of gilding, like right there when you look at it very closely. Looking at the side wings of the knees, you find that one was even etched upside down. To etch this armor would have gone to a painter, or in this case, a few painters and disassembled pieces. And they just simply had the orientation miscalculated, not something done by well-seasoned armor etchers. And so how do we interpret this? And so this, you see the figures are completely upside down, but they're right side up here, but they do match. Ordinarily, I would say this is spurious and must at least in part be modern 19th century restored etching to make up for losses from heavy grinding or even lost plates. However, here is the evidence on the contrary. For example, both of these cuffs were heavily ground down by a restorer to the point of almost losing the etching on the left here, but actually losing it on the right, where the restorer did go in with a burn or an engraving tool and engrave, not acid etch, but engrave new ornament to assimilate to the lost etching. This is all engraved in here. This demonstrates that the restorer who worked on the armor in the late 19th century did not practice etching, but did attempt this more laborious process of engraving. Also, all the poorer etching has all the same wear and loss that is consistent with centuries of wear and loss from rust. It simply is an anomaly that has puzzled me for years. I do, though, think I have a plausible explanation. That is, this armor was actually a plain armor garniture belonging to Nicholas Christoph, ordered from Augsburg and later etched up and gilded in a rush for the events leading up to his diplomatic mission in the coronation tournament of Henry of Valois, used late in 1573 or early 1574, which we heard was February, the tournament. There is some evidence that the armor was once plain, and I want to point that out here. These engraved, or rather incised lines on the contours of the plates, that's something you often see on plain Augsburg armors. Also, this series of stamped sevens, or these marks in succession of 4, all over many parts of the armor. They are seen on the helmet in the Metropolitan Museum, on our reinforcing breastplate, on one of our, or several of our pauldrons or shoulder defenses, and even on the cuff in the gauntlet that's in the Musée d'Armée in Paris. It's just about here. And they seem to have been etched over, so existed before the armor was etched. The purpose of the dots or stamps like this are usually to differentiate many armor parts in an armory with similar pieces so as not to get them mixed up. With decorated armor, this is less necessary and rather obvious. But with a plain one, it's another matter. In fact, Nicholas Christoph Radzivill's armory in Nischwitz Castle had several, perhaps as many as 6 plain Augsburg manufactured tournament armors for use by the court. Like the fragmented one on the left, also in the Art Institute's collection, and the nearly complete jousting armor in the Worcester Art Museum, also from Nischwitz. All with dots or some other means of serial indications on the parts. They all have a similar form to the decorated garniture, and indeed, the form looks to me more like the 1560s than 1573. It is my belief that this garniture was also plain in part of that group from the 1560s that was in Nicholas Christoph's armory, and that anticipating the coronation tournament and other festivities late in 1573 and early in 1574, he ordered the armor to be etched, perhaps by itinerant artists reliant on print sources and not as familiar with the process. It would have taken weeks and might have been parceled off to multiple hands, one primary and others copying, to get it done on time, and also gilded, polished, and re-riveted, perhaps months of work. It was a rush job, with some hands more skilled than others. Thus, the lack of coherence or the fact that it looks like no other etching from Augsburg, because it may have been done more locally. There wouldn't have been time to send the pieces from Poland or Lithuania to Augsburg and back. Some areas, like the reinforcers, are etched nicely, perhaps getting the most attention, while the arms and legs received much less. But be that as it may, the armor must still have stood out with gilded bands, and from a distance perfectly suitable for Nicholas Christoph's purpose as a symbol of prestige and status at court. After all, 5 months later, after the tournament, Henry of Valois would learn of his brother Charles IX's death and decided to ditch Poland for France, and it would all be for naught. To conclude, there's a lot that can be gleaned from closer looking at these armors. They can tell some stories about the past, but very often raise more questions than answers. They are great works of art and craftsmanship that speak to familiar human conditions, and others we can only imagine. From bespoke to recycled to altered and adorned, these are but short sketches of some of the more compelling armors on view in the galleries. I want to close by urging you to pay them a visit, and I hope seeing them for your own eyes will conjure up some deeper feelings about their remarkable past and how fortunate we are that they survive at all. Thank you.